back to the SK series, Serial Killers of Sidney Kelly. Today we are going to talk about Rodney Alcala, or as you may know him, the dating game killer. This guy was just absolutely crazy, but honestly, I totally understand what his victims were thinking, and as we go through the story, you'll understand. So let's get started with Rodney Alcala's early life. So Rodney was born August 23rd, 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. However, at a very young age, they decided to move to Mexico, but sadly, 3 weeks after their move to Mexico, their father abandoned their family. So their mother decided to move them all to Los Angeles, just him and his sister and his mother. So if you talk to Rodney's classmates, they would describe him as a very fun, cool guy. They thought he had really cool hair, really cool personality, and he was super smart. Aren't they all like super smart most of the time? But Rodney was known to be a really cool kid. So at 17 years old, Rodney decided to enlist in the Army. He was a clerk there for 4 years. However, one day he asked, could he take a small trip to Tennessee? So they said yes. However, later he was seen to gone AWOL. He decided to steal a car and take a trip to New York City. During this trip, Rodney just had the urge to hit someone. He said that he just heard voices in his head telling him to hit this woman that was walking by herself. This is why, men, if you're wondering, this is why we always have a taser, a knife, a gun, something, because of instances like this. He had a glass Coke bottle and just hit her upside her head and just wanted to assault her. And that's what he felt the urge to do that. So later, military found him because that woman contacted the police. So the military came back and got him. However, he did not want to go. So somehow he disappeared. I'm not really sure how he disappeared, but the military was able to get him back. And for some reason, they gave him an honorable discharge. I don't know what they were honoring him with, but they decided to give him honorable leave. I have no idea. So Rodney decides to go back to Los Angeles with his mother. And this is where his mother sees him acting a little strange. He starts doing these weird things like exposing himself to his family members. So that was really strange. However, the military takes him back and they diagnose him with anti-personality disorder, which I don't know if that really is what he had, because he actually, his classmates did like him when he was in high school. So I don't know, unless I just don't know that much about that illness, but he doesn't really seem to have had that. So Rodney actually decides to enter into UCLA where he studies photography. However, one day Rodney was just driving around and he was driving past this really expensive, nice hotel where there was this young girl named Tally Shapiro, and she was 8 years old. She was walking to school. Her parents were staying at this hotel because their house unfortunately burned down, so they just had to stay here for a short time being. Talia was actually a very smart girl. She knew not to talk to strangers. She knew to not get in any random person's car. Her parents taught her very well. She was wearing a nice little sundress and just casually walking to school. However, Mr. Rodney decided to drive next to her and ask her if she wanted a ride. Talia, being a smart girl, said, "No, I don't." However, Rodney kept pushing her into the car and he eventually told her that he knew her parents. Now, Talia, being a very respectful girl to her family, she said, "Oh, well, if you know my parents, then okay." So she got into the car with Rodney, and Rodney said, "Oh, well, it looks like you don't have to be at school right now." So he decides to take Talia to his apartment. Luckily, there was an eyewitness nearby. They saw Talia get into the car with this man, and they just thought that didn't look right. So they called the police, and this person actually ended up following Rodney to his apartment where he brought Talia. So police get to the apartment. Luckily, this person called the police. But police get to the apartment. They knock on the door. Rodney looks through the window and is not clothed at all and tells the police, hey, like, I'm just getting out of the shower, just give me a few minutes. However, one of the police officers noticed that Rodney was not wet at all. He was very dry, so there was no way that he got out of the shower. So the police actually kicks the door open where they see that Rodney has escaped. And poor Talia, only 8 years old, is laying in the kitchen in a pool of blood. So much blood that they thought there was someone else that he had assaulted there. But fortunately, it was just her in the apartment that day. She had been assaulted. She had this heavy beam on her neck, weighing on her neck, and she was not conscious at all. Luckily, Talia was a fighter and she did survive. She was in a coma for a while, but she did survive and she is still alive to this day. So Rodney, of course, no one wants to get caught for their actions. So Rodney decides to pack up and move to New York City. He decides, okay, I'm gonna need a new name. So he decides to go by the wonderful, like, aesthetic name of John Berger. I don't know where he got that from, but that was his new name. So he decides to attend the New York School of Art and study film. During this time, no one suspected him of anything because, of course, like Rodney has the most amazing personality. He had this long hair. Everyone thought he was such a cool guy. So he gets done with film school and he decides to be a camp counselor at an all-girls camp. And all these were children. And they did not do like background checks back then. So they had no idea of his previous life. They were just going by present interviews. And of course, Rodney knows how to talk to everyone. Rodney is so good with speaking with people. So fortunately, these two campers were out one day and they were going to the post office and they see a picture of an FBI most wanted list and missing people's report list. I don't know, as a kid I always looked at those too. Like I don't know if that's like normal, but I was so fascinated by those as a kid. But this was at the local post office and these two girls saw it and they said, interesting, that like actually looks like John Berger, like wow. So he looked so much like him that they decided to go back to the camp and tell the people in charge that they saw him on this list. So without further question, they called the police and John Berger, Rodney Alcala, wow, I'll remember his last name later, but I'm stuck on John Berger right now. But anyways, he is arrested and they want to put him on trial for the case of Talia Shapiro. However, the Shapiro family actually moved to Mexico because they did not want Talia going through anything like this again. They were just so frightened and they're just so lucky that she's alive. So they did not want her to testify in court, which I do get, but at the same time, so many other cases could have been prevented if the Shapiro family would have let their daughter testify. Let me know down in the comments if you guys would have allowed your kid to stand on court to testify against this case. I see both sides. I don't know. It's something I would definitely have to give a lot of thought to. So since she was not able to testify, they charged John Berger with child molestation instead of attempted murder. So he was in prison for 3 years. And of course, he sweet talked these people because at the time, a judge did not determine how long you were going to be in jail for. It was just a jury of officers that got together. So they decided that he was just going to be in there for 2 years because, of course, John Berger was just great at sweet talking people. He told them that he had given his life to Christ and he was a saint, a born again saint, and all of these things. Of course he was. So now he's out of prison. So, however, only a few months later, he decides to ask this 13-year-old girl to like smoke weed with him. and he decides to kiss her, and then he goes back to jail for another 3 years. So after a while, Rodney asked his parole officer, hey, like, can I please just take a trip to New York City? Because we know, like, John just loves New York City for some reason. He went there when he was in the army or the military. Then he went there for college. He just loves New York City. Now, at this time, New York City was crazy as crap. There were blackouts everywhere. There were murderers on the loose, so many unsolved murders. And the New York Police Department was just absolutely exhausted. So this was like his playground at the time, okay? So yes, Rodney actually just decided to roam the streets of New York during this time. And remember, he is into film and photography. So he is just walking around the streets asking people, hey, can I take your picture? Can I take your picture? And as we know, he is such a smooth talker. So he is taking everyone's picture. And if he really likes this person, he's like, hey, like, you are a model. Like, let's schedule an appointment and I will take your pictures. Now, most of the time, these pictures were highly inappropriate. Some of them were children. And in fact, when the police went into his home after Talia, I cannot get names right today, after Talia Shapiro was assaulted, the police found multiple pictures of young children in a very, in the form that Talia was in, assaulted and things like that, bloody, as he took nude pictures of them. So that's just very devastating. But back to New York, he is roaming the streets asking all these people, can he take their pictures? And one day, he runs into Ellen Hoover. So Ellen is actually the daughter of a very famous club owner in New York. She's also the goddaughter of, wow, I like literally forgot his name, Dean Martin. She is the goddaughter of Dean Martin, so she is a very huge, significant person. So on July 15th, she is reported as missing. So police go to search her home, and guess what they find on her calendar? Appointment with John Berger, photo shoot. So they go ask John, hey, like, have you seen this woman? And he says, oh yeah, we had our pictures, and after we took our pictures, she just left. However, a few days later, they found her body in a very dismantled body just in some part of New York. So they wanted to go find Mr. Rodney to talk about this case. However, he had already fled back to LA. So during this time of the late 70s, honestly, New York and LA was just a terrible place to be. There were murders happening left and right. Police were exhausted, so many unsolved murders, and this was like a serial killer prime time. Like, we had John Wayne Gacy, if you know him. So many serial killers were just having so much fun during this time. So in this time of the 70s, Rodney just like went at it. He killed 18-year-old Jim Carbone, who was killed on November 1977. He killed 27-year-old Georgia Wicks, 27-year-old. She was raped, beaten, and strangled in December 1978. Then we have Charlotte Lamb, who was killed. 32-year-old killed June 1978, and 21-year-old Jill Partu was killed on June 1979. So this man is just having the time of his life, killing all of these women. Unfortunately, there was all these other serial killers going on during this time. So police actually, Rodney was not their first choice for all these cases, even though he had a very consistent way of killing these women, assaulting them, and strangling them. There were other serial killers doing the same thing. So even though John Berger was a serial killer, he was a rapist, he was assaulting people, he decided that he was gonna go on a dating game show. And guess what? The producer absolutely loved him. They didn't do background checks. They just said, oh, he's he is good looking, he is a great candidate. So they decided to put him on the show. Now, this show was where there would be like three bachelors and one woman, and there would be like a veil in between them. They wouldn't see each other, so it was all based on conversation. So, kind of like Love is Blind, but there's no marriage, of course. But Love is Blind, and then instead of just one guy, there's three guys and one girl. So she's going all based on conversation. So the conversation was so stupid. Um, but she decides to pick Mr. John Berger. Now, when they were talking about John Berger, like giving his introduction, they described him as a very successful photographer who was also a copywriter in LA, and they described him as an amazing guy. But little did they know that he was a serial killer. So this woman's literally about to go on a date with a serial killer, right? So literally, her name was Cheryl Bradshaw. She decides to go out with John. However, as soon as they get backstage, John starts showing his true colors, and he is just so weird and creepy. And she decides to call the producers and say, hey, like, don't ever put this man on the show again. The date did not work out. This man is absolutely insane. So after that, John, he, thank God, did not murder Cheryl Bradshaw. But of course, he is just going around um, asking people for pictures. That's all he would do, is go to popular areas in LA and ask people to take their pictures. Until one day he was at Huntington Beach in California, and he ran into these two girls named Reagan and Robin. Now, Robin and Reagan were two girls just walking around the beach in their bathing suits, and Rodney decides to go up to them and say, hey, can I take your pictures? We can enter them into a swimsuit competition, and we can see if you guys win. So let me take your pictures. So the girls were like, okay. They were like 13 years old. They didn't really think anything of it. If any guys ever, I don't know, that's just kind of suspicious to me. Like, he took them to a secluded area. That should be a red flag right there. Never go to a secluded area like that, especially when you are wearing a swimsuit. So these two girls are taking pictures. However, someone followed them and saw that Rodney was taking their pictures, and they did not think that it was okay. They thought something was really weird. So they decide to call the police. So the girls immediately are taken to give a police report, and they come up with this amazing sketch of John. Looks just like him, right? So with this, they're able to start searching for John Berger. However, Robin realizes that she is late to dance practice. So she packs up her stuff and gets on a bike to go to her dance practice. However, she does not make it. She is abducted by John Berger, and unfortunately, he did murder her. Her body remains were found 40 miles away in some mountain. A park ranger found her body, and it was unfortunately eaten by animals. So that was just a very tragic moment. That was actually his last kill that was recorded. So after this, police were able to track Rodney down, and to talk about this case. So they were able to arrest him for the death of Robin. So when they went back to his apartment to search it, of course they're finding all these explicit photographs, but they also find a lock. And you know, serial killers with like locks, that just doesn't seem right. So this was a lock and key all the way to a storage by it all the way in Washington, Seattle, Washington. So police go to see what is in this safe, what's in this storage case, whatever. And they come to find all of these different rings. So, or sorry, not rings, earrings. So these were very unique earrings. They were different earrings. And when given to Robin's mom, she said that they were her child Robin's earrings that she was wearing that day. So Rodney had been keeping all of these things from his victims as kind of like a prize. So he was arrested on July 24th, 1979. Of course, they found his photographs, they found his locker, and things like that. Um, so y'all would think that the man would be put right in jail, but no. We had three three different trials, okay? And these went on for years. For years, okay? First trial they said like, oh, the camp ranger, whoever found the girl's body, he was like hypnotized or some crap like that. And then the next one, they said that the people defending Rodney were not doing a good job. So Rodney decides to be on the stand himself and defend himself. And Robin's mom unfortunately had to stand on the stand herself and talk to her daughter's murderer to try to prove him guilty. And Rodney just starts arguing with her. It was just a whole mess. So, you remember those earrings that we talked about earlier? Police found out that those actually belonged to all the four women that he killed earlier. Remember Jill Barcombe, Georgia Wixt, Jill Parento, I always say her name wrong, and Charlotte Land, those women. And these, we don't even know if he killed any more people, but at this time, you know, we could have DNA. This is now 2010. Yes, we went that we went from the 90s to 2010. So he's now found guilty of all five murders. So third time he is put on the stand, and everyone is very much in favor of let's put this man in jail for to get what he finally deserves, guys. I don't know why, like it seems like all these people always like somehow get off the hook. Like they seem so lucky, and I'm telling you, like these are the type of people who like live forever. So finally, Rodney Alcala, I told you I'd get the name right at the end. He's finally put in prison in California, and he is awaiting his execution. However, he actually just died alone in his cell. I mean, what else do you have to live for at that point? But he died on July 24th, guess what? 2021. Very recently, and he was 77 years old. So we actually have no idea how many people he actually killed, because this was during a time where we didn't have DNA tracing, we didn't have background checks. I'm so thankful for those. So we have so much to be thankful for now in this day, that we can track people down to limit the amount of serial killers running around. So that is the life of Rodney Alcala. Alcala. We're just gonna go by John Berger. Now, that is the life of John Berger. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Honestly, with this video, I would just say definitely just be careful with people. Like, even though they seem normal, you never know how crazy someone actually is. That's why I say his victims, it was a hard time, because he really seemed like a normal guy. He had a very nice camera. Who doesn't want to have their picture taken by a professional photographer? And he was hyping them up, making them feel confident. Only person who picked up on him being weird was Cheryl Bradshaw, but all these other women and children too, like, had no idea what type of person he was. So definitely be careful. Maybe have someone, if there's a photographer, be like, hey, can you show me your past work? And I want to see if I would be comfortable doing the photo shoots. And like, those photos are saved on the camera, so they don't have to like whip out some, unless back then it was like Polaroids maybe. Yeah, I guess they didn't have digital cameras back then, but I would still set up a meeting, be like, hey, can I see your work, something like that. But yes, definitely this times was just hard. These times are hard because there's no background checks and things like that. But just so we can take this into account today. Be careful who you set up meetings with. Be careful who you talk to. Be careful for walking alone by yourself, especially as a woman, because there are some crazy people out here. But guys, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to the SK series, Serial Killers with Sydney Kelly. Please subscribe and like this video. Comment down below if there's any other serial killers that you guys want to hear about. And thanks again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.